All right, hello and welcome to another sales chat, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Roy Osing. Roy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me.
Is up in Vancouver, and I'm joined as usual by my colleague Martin Neumeister, who is in lovely Vienna today. And I'm not in San Diego today. I'm just a little bit further up the coast in Los Angeles. So a little bit about Roy. Roy is a blogger, content marketer. He's an educator, coach, advisor. He clues us in from his 30-year plus leadership expertise. And in his spare time, he doesn't have any spare time. He's doing all those things, right?
I try and get a few other things done.
And so if you're not familiar with the formats of Sales Chat, right, it's 30 minutes. We have a Twitter chat going, so it's hashtag Sales Chats. And if you use that hashtag, you can join in the conversation. You can ask questions. You can answer the questions. It's an interactive program. And if some of the questions are relevant to what we're doing, then we will actually take them live here on the air with Roy. And today our subject is a really fascinating one, because we're going to talk about how can sales become more of a strategic weapon. So let's kick it off right there and then. And let me ask you, Roy, strategic weapon, what do you mean by that?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is in my experience, I actually think that most organizations underutilize the sales function because they treat the asset more tactically and traditionally rather than as a strategic asset in this particular case. And my observation is today that there seems to be more of an emphasis on how sales can be more efficient. How can it practice the art more efficiently? And so we see what I would call traditional tools like, how can I push products more efficiently? How can I follow the existing sales process more efficiently? It's a very short-term oriented function because we got quotas to reach. So how can I be super efficient, make my numbers? As far as client needs are concerned, I mean, it's all about finding an application for a product. So I think there's a huge opportunity cost that we're facing here when in fact we use how to make sales more efficient as the objective, as opposed to how can we leverage the function to have it contribute more to creating strategic value for the firm. And I think sales is super important because it's a customer facing function. It's a point that controls or has a potential to control more of the customer loyalty function than practically any other function in the organization. And my observation is we underutilize it and don't really redeem the value. The kind of direction that I advocate, that I'd like to see more businesses go with sales, is really around how can I create this function to deliver more strategic value for the organization. Things like focusing on relationships as opposed to pushing products. I'm not saying don't sell products, but I'm saying we gotta increase the weight of providing and creating deep relationship. Bonuses. I mean, let's face it, we're all driven by what we earn. And the interesting thing to me is, of course, sales tends to be driven by a bonus plan. It's around how many units do you sell? Okay, I'd like to see us inject the strategic value creation piece. And there's ways of doing that quite simply. If you're a strategic asset, you take direction from the strategic game plan of the organization. It's not just about what marketing tells you to do in terms of the marketing plan. That's a huge piece that needs to be developed. Thinking longer term is about strategic value creation. And something that I call digging for customer secrets, as opposed to looking at what the product applications are. Thinking about the customer holistically as a way to define where the opportunities are for the organization. And so this whole morphing from I'm a tactical tool to I'm a strategic asset is kind of like the journey that I really would like to see more of an emphasis on in sales.
So let me just stop you there, right? You mentioned something that I think is, for me, is fascinating, something that, I have looked at a lot in the past. And that is, I mean, you said salespeople becoming more, say connected to the strategic direction of the organization, or the strategy of the organization. I feel that a lot of times salespeople, not through any fault of their own, often are divorced from the strategic direction of the company, because organizations don't do a good job of communicating that strategy down through the organization, and especially to salespeople, who are the front line and the greatest intersection between you and the market, right? Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it's an issue of leadership, and the way I like to think about it is one of the absolute requirements of what I call a standout leader is the ability to translate the plan of the organization down to every function. In fact, take it to the extreme, down to every person in the organization, so they clearly have a direct line of sight between what they do and what the organization's trying to achieve. Far too often, leaders kind of like come up with their annual review of the strategy, and then they just throw it out onto the organization, and they assume that everybody gets it. Fact of the matter is, people don't get it. They're too busy doing other things. And if you ever want them to change your behavior, you need to make it matter for them. And that means you need face time with them. You need to explain, okay, we're going in a different direction. Salesperson, this is what you need to do differently. This is what it's okay to keep doing. But you need to have that conversation. Otherwise, the momentum of the past just keeps driving salespeople to do whatever they did yesterday. So totally in agreement. In fact, later on, we talk about challenges for sales to get to be a strategic asset, right? That's one of them.
Yeah, and so I think another thing too, just picking up on as well is, okay, so salespeople have quotas, they have goals to reach. It's a very momentum-driven job, right? And there's a lot of short-term things that they have to hit often. So how do you balance that? Because when you start to mention, take a strategic approach, anything with strategy in it feels like, okay, yeah, I get where you're going, but that sounds like it's going to take some time, and meanwhile I've got all these activities I've got to get through. So how do you start to translate that for salespeople, where they see it's something that's that's got not just long term but also short and medium term advantage for them?
So in terms of that's kind of like an area that we talk about. So what are the challenges, right, that we have to overcome in order to move ourselves as a sales discipline into that kind of area? And really, there's two pieces. Okay, there's definitely a sales leadership piece, and then there's an individual salesperson piece. If you're fortunate enough to have kind of what I would call enlightened sales leadership in the organization that actually believes in this strategic element, then good for you. I mean, you're well underway. I think sales leaders have to take on different things. Okay, they have to, first of all, redefine the sales role. If that role doesn't get defined, then unfortunately it defaults to the salesperson to apply pressure to make that happen. And that's a tough job. It's a tough job. It takes a lot of time pushing to try and get that, but you have to do it. If you really want to make a difference in the long term, you have to find a way. You just have to find a way of getting some balance between product push, right, and relationship building or strategic value creation. There's many things a salesperson can do, little things. These aren't big things, right? In fact, there's no silver bullet, right?
Sure.
There's not a silver bullet.
There never is.
There's a lot of little things that you can do. For example, you can push for role definition change. I'm not saying it's going to come easy, but I've seen it happen. It's just like you push, because the value proposition of strategic selling is huge. Nobody's going to argue about it. What we really need are salespeople willing to undergo the pain to actually push the process through. There's other things that salespeople can do. Let's get out there and let's start looking at customers holistically. Let's, what I would call, dig for secrets, as opposed to looking for product applications, right? Product applications is the same as yesterday.
Yeah, expand a little on that because we want to get practical, right? So when you say dig for secrets, what do you mean? Because that sounds like something people could start doing immediately.
They can do it. Well, look at it. It's one of the things that I held my guys accountable for. If we had a review, performance review, I always asked to see their secrets manual. Now it only took one meeting for them to figure out what the hell that was. Like I had these huge accounts, right? And it's isn't a complicated system CRM thing. The notion is when you're talking to a client, you want to get to know them from a broader perspective, not just, is this a good application for product X? And so I would be looking for, like, do you know this person? What do you know about them? What do you know about their life? What do you know about their families? Now, I'm not talking about being intrusive, okay? You can get a lot of information by having this conversation. That's all I'm saying. But make it matter. Make a point of digging, because knowledge is power. And the more knowledge you have about what customers, and by the way, John, it's not about what customers need. It's about what they want and what they desire, what they covet, what they lust for. That's what they're willing to pay for. Needs, unfortunately, drives you into a commodity business.
Right. Can you give me an example? Right. Can you give me an example of what a valuable secret that you could uncover would be?
So if we're talking about a business client, okay, it's a deep understanding of their cash flow situation. It got nothing to do with, do they need high-speed internet, right? It's like, do I get them and understand what their cash flow situation is? So maybe I can figure out a way to create a solution, not a product, but an integrated solution that I could actually offer to that client. It might also be, well, I'm going to the financial piece because that's something you can really get into quickly. And so that whole financial dimension. Another dimension would be, what's going on with your leadership team? You happy with your leadership team? I'm not saying you'd ask them that way, but finding gems about what's going on with leadership. Why is that important? Well, because the leaders make decisions. So maybe you can figure out a way to get more understanding of the leadership decision-making reality so you can play into that. Again, it's not about application of a product. So those are just examples. On the residential side, it's what kind of wine do you drink? Where do you go on vacation? What kind of hotels do you like? Are you a Marriott fan or not? Boom. Because if I know that, oh man, I have got so many opportunities to play to you if I can get that information from you.
So, and go back to the first piece, particularly the business piece, right? So let's be honest, like once upon a time, some salespeople could get away without really understanding business or the business of business or having, great levels of business acumen, right? What you're talking about right now is you can't have a conversation like that unless you have a good level of business acumen, unless you understand the business of business. Because if you don't understand the impact of cash flow, right, and liquidity and how that actually impacts a business on a monthly basis, and what's the difference between that and revenue, etc., you can't have that conversation. So how important is business acumen today to the salesperson if they want to get strategic?
Well, I think it's even, I mean, it's a requirement if you want to be strategic, but I also think that it's a requirement if sales wants to survive. Because quite frankly, the days of pushing product, I think, are over. They're over. I mean, if organizations haven't died because they're irrelevant in terms of product pushing, they're on their way. Okay, so if you really want to just pick it up and be relevant, you have to be able to speak in language that the customer, their reality. And the reality is all around what's going on with their teams, what's going on with their customers, what's going on with their finances, what about logistics, what the hell's going on with the. So if you're not able to ask questions around that, first of all, you cannot develop a meaningful relationship with that client. And if you can't develop a relationship, the ability of you to create strategic value is zero. So it's absolutely vital, absolutely vital. But you see, part of the thing is we don't require salespeople. We don't drill them. We don't drive them to acquire. We don't hire people. okay, necessarily with demonstrated experience in terms of financial acumen. I mean, it's like, if you're not hiring the right skill sets, why do you have a right to demand that they have them? Because some people have different levels of expectations. And so not only is it critical, I mean, to me, it differentiates organizations too. I talk about be different or be dead. Okay. If you're not different, you're going to be dead. One of the things that differentiates is the ability for people to be able to speak that way with clients. Okay. So it's vital.
Okay, so let's go back. So if somebody's listening to this and saying, okay, I'm a sales manager, I have a sales team, what are some of the first steps I can take to start thinking strategically or adopting a more strategic approach? What are some practical what are the baby steps?
So if you're the sales leader of a team,
yeah,
was that the question?
Yes. Yeah. What are the baby steps I can take with my team right now to get them more strategically focused?
Yeah. So the first thing that I had to do was I had to start to push to redefine sales. That says basically sales is not selling. It is not selling. That's a means to an end. Let's talk about the end. The end is creating strategic value. So that conversation is a tough one, but it's where you have to start. You have to begin to do that. And then you go to the next step and say, well, okay, if we're getting some sort of buy-in to that, the next thing I did was I changed the sales compensation plan. Now that was interesting, right? I mean, was that threatening? Oh yeah. But what it was is I took what we had, which was largely a product unit push kind of bonus plan, which most people have, and I introduced the strategic element. Okay, very small at first, and then I started working. I told everybody, by the way, here's how we're changing the plan, and over time, we're moving the influence of that strategic piece up, because that's where I want the organization to go. I revised the value statements in sales. I started to get that whole notion of building relationship and figuring out what customers' wants and desires were, and that sort of value creation stuff. I started to build that into the value statement. And as I say, the big thing that really got people's attention was I revised the commission plan and started to inject with definition, but keeping it simple. This is not something that's driven by an algorithm that you need a PhD for.
Right.
Because
I'm a big believer in keeping comp plans simple.
You got to keep it simple. Otherwise, people won't understand. If they don't understand it, they don't buy in. So those are just a few of the things. And then I was patient, okay? And that's really, my wife would say that that's an impossibility. But the truth of the matter is, it's like you got to take baby steps, and you got to stay relentless, and you got to stay tenacious and have realistic goals, but always be moving to that end game.
So those are some baby steps for the sales manager. Then for the salesperson themselves, what are some of the baby steps that a salesperson can take individually to start moving in this direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing that people have to do is take personal ownership in the idea. Like, it's a change, right? So if you don't want to go there, okay, it's going to be a little difficult to get you to move along the line, right? So I mean, people basically getting themselves intellectually and emotionally around this whole notion of creating value as opposed to pushing product. People need to spend time with that. And hopefully they say, you know what, in terms of the value of the organization, I need to do this. So you need to get them to the point where they say, I need to do this. The second thing that's really, really vital is they have to go, as an individual salesperson, you have to go to boot camp on the strategic game plan of the organization. Don't wait for it to be fed to you. Go find it, learn everything you can about it, right? From the point of view of what value can I add, right? To actually help this plan succeed in the executional sense. That's a huge piece, because if people don't get the strategic game plan, how can they create value? We talked about going to clients as a example, and I would call going under the covers with clients to figure out what they want and desire, right? You can start that tomorrow. the next time you're talking to a customer, all right, ask questions that talks to them about their reality, not your reality of product. And that's a great start. Okay, that is a super way to start. And then what I would do is, once I've understood the game plan of the organization, I would come up with a draft account or sales plan for me as a person that actually tried to translate that strategy into what I should be doing differently. Okay. And with that, you just start doing it, moving things along, share what you're doing with your colleagues, your sales colleagues, learn from them. Hopefully you can influence them to sort of do similar things, and as a team, get that herd moving slightly west. That's what I would do.
Excellent. So, okay, so that's what a sales manager can do, what a salesperson can do, and that's when you're, when you have decided to adopt this. So we touched on this earlier. So what about the challenges to getting a strategic approach going? Because let's face it, I mean, in sales, a lot of times we're really comfortable with a short-term focus, like activity, like get the deal in, get moving, keep going, kill it, move on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, I'm one of these guys that doesn't believe the intellect drives anything. I mean, any significant change in the world does not come from the left brain. It comes from the right brain. It comes from your guts and your heart. And if you don't believe it, walk away. In fact, I could not invest any time in any salesperson that deep down did not believe this was the right thing to do. Okay, so the biggest challenge for me as a salesperson is, do I believe or not? If I do believe, then I'm probably something worth investing in. If I don't believe, then it's a pretty tough go. So that whole personal accepting the role change, again, is right up front. And you don't need permission to do that, right? You can reach that conclusion on your own. I mean, God, just take a look at the other sales organizations and look at the successful ones and examine what they do. Okay, most of them will be adding a significant strategic component. The other thing is, damn it, push for change. If you believe that this is the right thing to do, and if you believe that the sales role needs to be changed, push for it, okay? And just get yourself out there, expose yourself, push, push, push. My experience has been that the passionate people with integrity, right, not just doing it to be aggressive, generally get listened to. Okay, it may take a while. The ones that persevere get listened to. So push for it, push for it. And also at the same time, we alluded this to a bit earlier to this, and that's this whole issue of new skills. I mean, the strategic value creation world is a world that requires not throwing out the old and taking on the new, but it definitely requires building on the old with new relevant skills. We talked about financial or business acumen, but there's other things, you know. I mean, what comes to my mind is problem solving. I mean, when you're pushing a product, you don't have to have the same problem solving skills as when you're sitting in front of a client trying to figure out how to provide a solution, an overall solution for them that creates value for both. That's a different set of skills, and it's really, really important. Hell, I'm going to say it, psychology. Oh my God. I mean, there's a little bit of that in terms of human behavior.
Sure, there's a lot of it in terms of human behavior.
So at work there. And so, you know, there's a whole skills thing. And I think lastly, what probably is the most relevant is, are you prepared to put your quota at risk?
Right.
Are you prepared to put your quota at risk to do the right thing in the longer term? And that is the killer question.
And not
we've
for
talked
the faint,
about sales quotas at length before.
Not for the faint-hearted.
So those are a few kind of non-trivial challenges that sales face when they look at this.
So as we bump up against the end, we've got a few minutes left. Roy, why don't you recap for a moment why you think an organization, a sales manager, salespeople listening to this now, why should I take this on?
Well, I think what I would say is, if you want if we want, as an organization, to get more out of our sales force and really leverage the talent and the value that they represent, then we have to make a shift in the sales function. We have to make a shift away from the way we've always done it, which is selling product, to a new world that is creating value. And that's almost a right angle turn, okay? Mm-hmm. I think it's valuable because, especially as we go forward, organizations will win and fail on how much value they create for their client base, not how many products they push. Completely different set of criteria, right? And so in terms of longevity of an organization, the shift for sales is exceedingly critical. Okay, right. So shareholders, employees, hell, job satisfaction for a salesperson. I mean, this is a fun job, right? As opposed to the relentless 30-day boom, boom, boom. And so overall, organizations need us as salespeople, need the sales function to make that change, even if we don't want to. It's a change that we need to make.
All right. We always like to ask our guests this question. So what do you, Roy, personally do every day to set yourself up for success?
Yeah, and by the way, that is a great question. That's a super question, and it actually made me think a little bit about it, because, you know, quite often there's a number of factors, but I think a mindset for success is all about where you get your energy to move you forward. Because without energy, you can't succeed, because you know how difficult it is out there. There's all these challenges and so forth. And so with that kind of as a context, my energy actually every day in drive has always come from one thing only, and that is I am always trying to look for opportunities to be different in everything I do. It's like this filter. It's like these glasses that I look through and say, oh, okay, I have to do that. The first thing I think about is I ain't going to copy anybody. Best practice suck. I've written enough about that for you guys. It's just not where I go. It's all about how can I add a twist? How can I be contrary? And how can I do something different? Because that gets my energy going. And when the energy goes, generally, I have much more chance of being successful. The be different thing, which I always encourage people to, I did a lot of mentoring with young professionals. And I said, look, if there's one thing you can do, and it ain't a big thing, it's a little thing. Look for the little things that you can do differently than the rest of the herd. Let the herd, you know, practice benchmarking. That's not what you need to do. You need to divert and get yourself over here, because you got a better chance of succeeding and being noticed. And it goes and goes and goes. So keep the pressure on yourself to be different. Keep it. Every morning when you wake up, ask the question, how can I be different? Given what I'm going to do today, how can I put a spin on it that would surprise people? The world is about surprises. Success is about surprises. Mindset for success never comes through a copycat mentality. Never.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, that's fantastic. So Roy Osing, I highly recommend you look up his series, Be Different or Be Dead. You can find them on SalesPOP, salespop.pipelinersales.com. My name is John Golden, Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine. My colleague Martha in Vienna, thank you for keeping the Twitter chat going. And Roy, a pleasure as always chatting, and I'm sure we'll see you back really soon.
Thanks very much, John and Martha. I appreciate the opportunity to be involved.
Great. Thanks, Roy.